us. I'm Barbara Shipnuck. I am the president of National Council of Jewish Women for Greater Long Beach and West Orange County. And we are delighted to be hosting this afternoon program. National Council of Jewish Women is an organization that focuses on issues of equity for women, children, and families. And one of the most important issues in today's world is the issue we're talking about today, the issue of immigration and refugees. National Council has championed these issues for 125 years, and the Long Beach, West Orange County section is celebrating our 75th anniversary and continuing to work on issues to protect families and the rights of women and children. And we hope this afternoon's program will continue to add to your understanding of this issue, this particular issue, and that you will join us in the future in working toward equity for immigrants and refugees, and perhaps join us in some of our future programs as we talk about some of our other issues. Thank you very much again, and I'm going to turn the program over to Deb Lelchuk, who is one of our vice presidents for advocacy. Thank you, Deb.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Good afternoon or evening if you are in another time zone. A couple of Zoom announcements before we get started. You entered muted, and we'd like you to stay muted throughout the program. When the spotlight is on a speaker, such as myself, your Zoom window should automatically change to speaker view. We encourage you to remain in speaker view to best enjoy the program. If you have questions, please put them in the chat directed to me, Deb. I've added Q&A to my name. We will have a question and answer session after all three speakers have presented. This weekend, more than 300 organizations across the country, now around the world, have been observing Highest Refugee Shabbat to amplify the stories and the plight of the world's 70 million displaced people. In recognition of Highest Refugee Shabbat's mission, our section will educate you on the status of United States immigration law, the situation at the US-Mexico border, and the opportunities for advocacy and activism, both locally and nationally. We have three outstanding speakers today. Our first speaker is Jose A. Serrano, Associate Director of Immigration and Outreach and Senior Immigration Specialist for World Relief Southern California. Jose is a Department of Justice accredited representative with 10 years of experience working in all aspects of immigration law. During the last 6 years, he has helped resettle more than 600 refugees from different parts of the world and represented dozens of asylum seekers in their immigration proceedings. As an advocate for vulnerable populations, he actively collaborates in refugee forums in Orange and Los Angeles counties, is an executive committee member of the State Advisory Council on Refugee Assistance and Services, and works to build inclusive communities for new Americans in Southern California. In October 2017, Jose founded Little Brushstrokes, Refugee Kids Arts Program, to provide refugee and immigrant children a safe space for healing through creative expression. His passion for his work stems from his own experience immigrating to the United States as a child, living without status for nearly 20 years, and helping to navigate systems for his parents and immigrant community. Our second speaker, Sue Kenney-Pfalzer, is the Director for Border and Asylum Network at Highest, where she manages, Cynthia, we got the spotlight coming?
It's not letting me spotlight Sue. We need her video on, I think.
Ah, okay.
It's on. It's
on. Okay. Here we go. Now I got you.
Okay. Sue is the Director for Border and Asylum Network at Highest, where she manages and coordinates cross-border collaboration projects to assist asylum seekers along both sides of the southern border of the United States. Prior to her current role, she worked in refugee resettlement in Highest and the Ethiopian Community Development Council. She's been a legal aid staff attorney in the Republic of Palau, focusing on the rights of foreign workers, and had a solo practice in family law in Columbus, Ohio. Sue received her law degree from The Ohio State University and a master's degree in public administration and nonprofit administration from Cleveland State University. Dr. Norma Stoltz Chinchilla is a professor emeritus in sociology and women's and gender and sexuality studies at Cal State University, Long Beach. She is the co-author with Nora Hamilton of the award-winning book, Seeking Community in a Global City, Guatemalans and Salvadorans in Los Angeles, published in 2001. She has also published articles on women's movements in Latin America and Central American migration to the United States. She first traveled to Guatemala as a Fulbright Fellow in 1965 and became an immigration justice advocate in the early 1980s when Salvadorans and Guatemalans came to Los Angeles in record numbers. She became the co-founder of the Long Beach Immigrant Rights Coalition in 2006 and served as its executive director until September 2020. She is currently the coordinator of a new group, the Long Beach Immigration Forum, which is creating a network of people passionate about advocating for more humane, just, and pragmatic immigration policies, as well as locals who are already volunteering their time to help refugees, asylum applicants, and other immigrants to exercise their rights and achieve their goals. Before the program begins, I'd like to say that NCJW, Greater Long Beach and West Orange County is admiring of the work of our speakers organizations and very appreciative of their appearing here today. We will be making donations to those organizations and invite you, if you support their work, as well as the work of NCJW, Greater Long Beach and West OC, to donate too. The link to do so was in the confirmation email you received this morning and will be in the chat periodically throughout today's program. Thank you for your anticipated generosity, and I'll start the program by turning the microphone over to Jose Serrano.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate us having a conversation on immigration. I think before anything, and it's something that I'm sure all of us agree on, but I want to make sure that this is a safe space for everyone to just be open-minded, right? First of all, and then the second thing, to be able to really just share what your positions are and what your belief or what you've heard. I think it's really healthy to have these conversations about immigration. I was asked to discuss the new policy that has, or bill that has been introduced by the current administration, and that's the Pathway Towards Citizenship Bill 2021. But before we start and dig into what that bill addresses and how it impacts DACA recipients, which are children who have arrived to the United States as young adults, right, or young children, and who are now under a protective status, technically. Also addressing TPS, which is a protective status for especially Central American individuals, as well as other individuals from other countries, and how they're impacted, and just the general overview about the bill. I want us to get a little bit better understanding of, like, what is this bill in reference to our Immigration and Nationality Act and system as a whole, right? And so we start off the Immigration and Nationality Act, the history of it. All of the bills that have been put into place, all of the policies, are just fragments of a bigger issue that we have, right, in the United States, or a bigger system. And so in order for us to understand this bill, we need to look at the history, right? And so we start off with policies that have always been very restrictive, right? We start with Asian Exclusion Act, right, in the 1800s, excluding Asians, right? Then we move on into areas where, for example, there were policies like the Bracero program that welcome, right, a lot of individuals from Latin America, specifically Mexico, right? And then there's a repatriation system that takes place where even US citizens were forcibly sent back to their country or the Mexican country where they were just sent even as US citizens, right? Then we have other bills that were introduced throughout history that, for example, just recently, the Muslim ban, right? Or the family separation at the border, that were all legitimized, right? Put it into policy or put into law that really created family separation, has fragmented just I think as a whole, the country that we live in, it really never addresses the issue. And I think what's really important within the context of even this bill that was recently introduced is that we're always discussing or talking about immigrants as the problem, right? But we're never talking about how the system is the problem. Right? The system is a system that has not been discussed, or the policies that are even put in place are not policies that are welcoming, right? They're not policies that are just necessarily. And so with this new policy that has been introduced right immediately by the Biden administration, again, it's the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021, right? It seeks to modernize the immigration system or the immigration law. How does it do this, right? Well, first of all, it tries to change wording in the actual Immigration Nationality Act. So the idea of an alien, right? Since the very beginning, we're already creating some kind of difference of them versus us, right? Type of rhetoric or mentality where they're seen as different, and yet they're a part of the communities that we live in. They're woven into the fabric of the world that we are a part of here in the United States. And so they're changing the word alien from alien to non-citizen, right? A word that is more welcoming, that addresses or at least humanizes a person, right? The second thing that it does is also it addresses issues of migration from other countries. So recently, and I'm sure other presenters are going to be discussing about this, there's been a huge number of individuals fleeing their country of origin seeking asylum, right? And asylum, similar to refugee status, is when individuals are trying to earn, or not earn, but have that protection from a country that's nearby because they don't feel safe at home, or they feel like their government can't protect them. And so the Biden administration is seeking to really address issues of migration from countries, especially when it comes to refugee and asylum. Also, the other thing, the other items that are extremely important within this bill is that for the very first time since the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, it really seeks to provide an opportunity for individuals who are already in the United States without status to gain some kind of pathway towards citizenship. And so this new policy actually creates a new category, and it would be considered, it's called a lawful prospective immigrant. So it's almost like a pre-green card holder, right? We have, usually right now in the United States, we have like temporary protective status or humanitarian types of visas, right? That's a type of category. And then we move into legal permanent residence and then citizens. So usually someone, before they become a citizen, they are a lawful permanent resident. Well, now the new category would be that this lawful prospective immigrant would be on a pathway towards residency and then citizenship, giving them that opportunity to ultimately have lawful status. And so what's really great about this new bill that's been introduced is that, as I mentioned before, there's 11 million individuals without status, right? And in the last few years, there has not been a policy that has been addressing this situation. If anything, we've created more restrictive policies, right? We created categories where we criminalize individuals, right? The 11 million that are in the United States who are essential workers, right? Who pay taxes, who during a pandemic have been extremely essential in making sure that our relatives, right, or even ourselves could have food on the table, or perhaps even in the medical system, if we're sick, that they're taking care of us, right? For the very first time, this bill is attempting to kind of create once again a pathway towards residency and citizenship for individuals who oftentimes have been used more as a political scapegoat, right? Or as a pathway towards gaining power, because frameworks of immigrants are not good for the country, immigrants are criminal, immigrants disobeyed laws, and they're not waiting in line. All of that rhetoric around and that is a tainted perception of who immigrants are, unfortunately has been very welcomed by some individuals in the United States who've been here for a while and firmly believe that if immigrants are here in the United States, that it's a threat to their security, or perhaps their in them having more resources, that it's a threat to them. And so I think being extremely cautious about this bill and how it's presented, and looking into the history is extremely important. Some of the challenges that we foresee coming is that, for example, it's being introduced as a reform. And when words like reform are used, people start feeling afraid, like people are not waiting in line, right? But we need to really focus on, like, well, was there a line to begin with? And the truth is, there's never been a line, right? As I mentioned before, it's important to look into the history. And so all of the policies that have been put in place have been policies that are restrictive, policies that are unjust, policies that don't necessarily create a pathway towards residency and citizenship. Also, one important thing to really address right now is that, you know, in the 10 years that I've been working in the immigration field, and also in my experience being undocumented, it's like not once have I ever heard someone who's undocumented say, hey, can you not tell anyone about my undocumented status? And you know, I don't want to become a lawful permanent resident and then a citizen. I just want to be on the download and kind of hide in the shadows. No, if anything, actually individuals really want a pathway towards citizenship, but unfortunately there's nothing that's made available, right? And so even in the history of immigration, you know, there were policies. Our immigration system started with quotas, right? Having a certain amount of people from certain countries or certain countries around the world. And then that system was eliminated, and we moved towards a family reunification process. And unfortunately, family reunification is only written in the books, but it's not necessarily a well-defined process that actually creates reunification. Because oftentimes in the United States, there's what we call multi-status households. So individuals where there's children that are US citizens or parents that are residents and citizens, but one way or another, there's someone that cannot get a law, there's one way or another, there's families that are not able to apply for residency or citizenship because, again, the policies are not necessarily made in their favor. And so even if they wanted to adjust or get in the line, right, they're not able. And so I think what's really important now for us, the things that we need to do is, first of all, have conversations with folks who might not necessarily be on the same boat, right? Individuals that have a tainted perception of immigrants. So engage in conversation, right? Really address the fears that they might have. That is extremely, extremely important because oftentimes people are just afraid and they say things without really knowing the history or the facts, right? The second thing is looking at this bill. It's available online, right? Again, it's called the US Citizenship Act of 2021 under this current administration. Look at the facts. It's not a perfect bill, but it really tries to create and address issues that no other president has attempted to do so, or unfortunately failed, because again, we live in a state or a country that where immigration has been politicized when it doesn't have to be politicized. These are human beings that we're talking about. And so looking into that. And then the third thing is really be active. Create opportunities like this where you can learn more about the policies that are being introduced, the law, the language, how is it important, how does it impact immigrants, how does it impact citizens, right? And have those discussions and then ultimately call your representatives, right? Make sure that you use your voice so that you can create a more welcoming environment. Use your voice to create policies that are not necessarily focused on incriminating a person who's been already living here, who's essential, who's given its best to make sure this country is welcoming for all of us, right? And create solutions, right, based on the system that has not been working towards the immigrants. And so, you know, we'll have an opportunity to ask more questions, but that's ultimately what the new pathway towards citizenship bill ultimately is, creating more opportunity for individuals to become permanent residents.
Thank you very much, Jose. You've given us a lot of things to think about, and we're now going to hear from Sue Kenney-Pfalzer to talk about the US-Mexico border, where apparently she is at the moment.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm currently sitting in El Paso. I can see Juarez from the window. I've been here since last Tuesday and crossing into Juarez every day to help with some processing that I will get into in my presentation to tell you about what HIAS is doing. So I've been asked to talk to you today about what's happening on the border. And that is a very large topic to fit into 15 minutes. So I had to sort of try to decide what I wanted to cover and in how much depth I wanted to cover it. So if there's something that you would like more detail on, feel free to ask in the Q&A portion. The first thing that I want you all to know is that right now, the border is essentially still closed. While Trump was president, he enacted this rule called, it's under the statute in the US Code of Title 42, and it's a public health regulation, but he's using it as a way, or he enacted it as a way to keep the border closed to migrants, to asylum seekers, because the border is open to other people. Business people are literally crossing every day, but for some reason, migrants would bring COVID, but these other people going back and forth don't bring COVID, according. But so when Biden became president, we were very hopeful that he was going to eliminate this Title 42 process, and he has not. He's continued to keep Title 42 in place, claiming it's for health reasons. But I would say all of the service providers that work along the border here would agree that Title 42 must be repealed immediately. It's a humanitarian disaster, not to mention, in my opinion, it's against the law, because it's in the US Code that when a person crosses an international boundary and approaches our border and asks for asylum and says that they are fleeing persecution and they're seeking refuge in our country, we have to allow them access to that process. And what happens under Title 42 is it's being called expulsions. So someone approaches the port of entry, they say they want asylum or not, doesn't matter. They are quickly turned around within a couple of hours and taken right back over the border to Mexico. If they are from Central America or from Mexico, they're not given a chance to apply for asylum. They're not given any kind of interview. They're supposed to be a minimal screen for what's called protection against the Convention Against Torture. But in all practicality, that is not happening either. And people are being returned every day. However, if you're from, there are lots of other migrants, asylum seekers at our southern border, including Haitians and people from various African countries that are also seeking asylum. And Mexico will not allow them to be returned across the border. So the US government is putting them on planes and flying them home. So for example, Haitians, literally every week, there's plane loads of Haitians being sent back to Haiti into the danger that they just fled from. To me, that's very, very problematic. And also Cameroonians, for example, like it's just not a good situation. So to put it in perspective, we don't have up-to-date numbers, but just between March, which is when COVID really hit and Title 42 was enacted, March of 2020 and October of 2020, 300,000 people were expelled under this Title 42 process and not given a chance to seek asylum. I also want to get into a bit about the Remain in Mexico program, because that's why I'm actually in El Paso and Juarez right now. So the Remain in Mexico program to give you a background, it was enacted in January of 2019 under the Trump administration. And the set of regulations that enacted this policy were called the Migrant Protection Protocols, or MPP for short. So you'll hear a lot of people, including myself, call it MPP. Although the term Migrant Protection Protocols is a joke, they don't protect anybody. Those of us who work on the border actually refer to them as the Migrant Persecution Protocols, because that's really what they did. And as of February 2021, which is just before COVID started, more than 70,000 asylum seekers were returned to Mexico to wait while their asylum cases were pending in the United States under this Remain in Mexico program. So this is how it would work. Once, I don't even want to get into metering because that's a whole nother problem, but once someone got a chance to even approach the border, because there's this other method that was used to keep people from even being able to approach the port of entry. But once people were allowed to approach the port of entry and say, I'm fleeing persecution, I want to seek asylum, they were processed by the Customs and Border Protection and given what's called an NTA. It's a notice to appear, and it's a legal document that starts their court process. They were given an alien number, which is the identification number that's used for all immigration purposes in the United States. And normally, when you get this NTA, you are in the United States and you're waiting in the United States for your hearings, and so that you can continue to seek asylum and attend your hearings. But under the Remain in Mexico program, here's your NTA. Now go back to Mexico, wait in these dangerous border towns for months, years now, and as your asylum hearings go on, and if you are granted asylum, then we'll let you come into the United States, maybe, unless the government appeals, and then you'll still have to wait in Mexico. Even if the judge grants you asylum, you still have to wait in Mexico till the government appeals. And then if that appeal is denied and your asylum grant stays, then you can enter the US. Well, this was very problematic for many reasons. It denies people due process to make them try to fight their asylum claims while they're in a whole nother country. How are they supposed to access attorneys? Before MPP, US attorneys didn't cross the border to practice in Mexico, they practiced in the United States. Also, the border towns that they were forced to wait in were extremely dangerous. In one area where MPP court was located in the state of, in the city of Brownsville, Texas, across the border, it's called Tamaulipas. The state is called Tamaulipas, the city is called Matamoros. That area of Tamaulipas the State Department has designated it as the same threat level as Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, like where there are active wars going on. Yet our government sent people to live in those conditions while they awaited their asylum procedures. And by the way, they had to come back to the border and present themselves for their next hearing, and then their next hearing. There was usually at least 3 times they would have to go back and have a hearing before they actually got to tell their story and have what we call a merits hearing. And out of the people who actually did get to that point and got to have a merits hearing, the grant rate was extremely low. It was like 1% of people that got to actually made it to that stage were actually granted any sort of relief. It's just really a travesty of due process all around. The good news is that the MPP program has now been stopped. Shortly after Biden was inaugurated, he said no more MPP, no more people will be put into MPP. Now, in effect, MPP had sort of already stopped because when COVID hit, and as I said, the border was pretty much shut down, people weren't really being processed at all. So they weren't really being put into MPP, generally speaking. Anyway, but Biden said officially, no more MPP. But then the problem remains, what about these 70,000 people who were subjected to this clearly illegal program? What's going to happen to them? What kind of redress are they going to get? Now, there are approximately 25,000 cases that are still in this MPP program, meaning they are waiting for their next hearing, and they're still waiting, and they're still outside of the United States waiting for their hearings. Those are called active MPP cases. So Biden has announced in late February a wind down process, as we're calling it, wind down of MPP, whereby people in that position, meaning active MPP cases, would start to be processed into the United States so that they could be in the United States to finish out their asylum process and have their final hearing adjudicated by an immigration judge. They're granted a type of sort of temporary parole, but does not grant them legal status. And it does not guarantee that asylum will be granted, but it does allow them to at least enter the United States so they can pursue their asylum claim while in the country, while being able to have access to attorneys, while not having to live in fear every day. If an asylum seeker's claim is denied, once they're allowed to enter, they would be subject to removal, or what used to be called deportation. But this marks a huge, monumental cause for celebration, and that's why I'm actually here. We're processing in Juarez. So phase 1 started in Tijuana on February 19th with 25 people a day. It's now up to, I believe, 50 people a day, or close to going to 100 a day, being processed through Tijuana and San Diego. It started in Matamoros, which is where the tent camp was that you may have heard of. And that tent camp is now completely emptied out. And now they're starting to process people from that are living outside of the camp in what we call the rentas, the people who are renting in the nearby area. And then Juarez started on February 26th. And we are, as of tomorrow here in Juarez, we're going up to 50 people a day. And what HIAS's role is we are the main partner with UNHCR, which is the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. The UNHCR was selected by the US government to be like the main implementing international NGO to help implement this process on the Mexican side of the border. So it's UNHCR, the International Organization for Migration, and UNICEF is also having a bit of a role. And so HIAS is the only NGO that's partnering with one of those organizations, with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, to help implement this program, this wind down. And we are submitting cases to the UNHCR that are particularly vulnerable, that need to be fast tracked. And we are also we're also processing the required paperwork that the US government is requiring for each person when they come to the port of entry. So in Mexico, we have this sort of staging area where we're meeting with people and we're helping them fill out that paperwork, including like the address they're going to go to in the US so they can get their hearing notices. And their hearings are going to be automatically changed from the port court at the border to the court of wherever they're going in the United States. So let's say they were in Juarez, but they're going to go live in Florida. With this paperwork that we're helping them fill out, their court will automatically be changed to Florida from El Paso. I know it's complicated. I don't know. I don't know how much to go into the weeds of it, but again, if people have more questions, I'm happy to talk. Two other things I want to say real quick. I'm not sure what my time is like, but everyone is getting a COVID test. The International Organization for Migration is conducting a COVID test for each and every person, and only negative tests will cross into the United States. And I also wanted to emphasize another thing HIAS is doing besides the actual processing with UNHCR is we are doing a lot of community education, where we created Know Your Rights PowerPoint to explain to people, what is this wind down process? Do I fit into this? What about my case? Does my case fit into this? Or when is it going to be my turn? And because it can be very complicated. There are a lot of different case postures, legally speaking, that it's hard to figure out where you fit into this. And so in addition to the group sessions that our HIAS Mexico colleagues provide, we also have individual KYR sessions. KYR, I'm sorry, stands for Know Your Rights, whereby asylum seekers can meet one-on-one via Zoom with an experienced US asylum attorney and really go through like what is my case? Where do I fit? I don't understand. I tried to do this, it didn't work, whatever. It's just to help make sure they really understand what's going on and where they fit in the process. So the last thing I wanted to say is that HIAS is also doing a lot of advocacy in terms of, we are submitting a report. It should be out literally any day now, called Roadmap to Recovery, that I helped write with our policy counsel, Andrew Geibel. It's a set of recommendations for the Biden administration of how to fully unwind MPP, not just this phase one, but all of the people that were affected by MPP, as well as other really harmful policies that were enacted during the Trump administration. We came out with an executive summary that the White House does have and has been considering. And then the full report really explaining everything will be out any day now. So I will stop there and wait for some questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sue. You've given us a lot of information. I do have some questions that we will get to at the end. Right now, I'm going to invite Norma Chinchilla to speak on what's happening locally.
Yes, thank you very much for this invitation. And also thank you for the welcome to the ranks of members of National Council of Jewish Women. I wanted to, perhaps you can pull up the PowerPoint that I had. Is that possible? My topic is to talk about what's happening in the Long Beach area, what I know about happening in the Long Beach area, and what might be some possibilities for volunteer opportunities or groups or campaigns that you can support. So working for justice and a welcoming community in Long Beach. First slide, please. I thought I'd start just by reminding you that we actually have achieved a number of milestones over the last 2 years. Can you put up the next slide? Is it working? Wonderful. Okay. In Long Beach, we've had a very active community. Probably some of you have been part of these events. Perhaps you've attended a city council meeting to support something, or you were at a march or a vigil. There have been many of those. We've had marches and vigils to oppose the deportation of local folks, of the separation of families, both here and at the border. We passed something called the Long Beach Values Act, which in theory at least limits our local police cooperation with ICE, so that if somebody gets stopped for any reason here in Long Beach, their information isn't automatically turned over to ICE and end up getting deported for a minor traffic violation or some other, or even without being convicted of anything, which had happened in the past. We have the Long Beach Justice Fund, which provides pro bono assistance for low-income residents facing deportation. And this is historic because not only did the city kick in $250,000 for this fund, and we got some matching money, but also it applied to anybody. It's called universal representation, which isn't the case with the Los Angeles Fund. Los Angeles Fund only supported people who didn't have any criminal conviction on their record, so it could eliminate even minor convictions. And then we have the bond fund, which is still just getting started, but we have been able to raise some bonds to get some people out of the detention center, Adelanto, a for-profit detention center, probably one of the worst in the country. That's our local detention center. Next slide. Can you put the next slide up? Is it coming up? Not working? Since the COVID 2020 shutdown is, yeah, there it goes. Well, looks like we're out of order. That's all right. I'll just, are there, okay, there we go. So since the shutdown, it's been really difficult to, as you can imagine, everything had to shift. And the big challenge was, how do you reach an immigrant community 1 out of 4 people are immigrants in Long Beach. Now a certain percentage of those are already citizens, maybe fluent English speakers. They wouldn't have that much trouble accessing resources, and they would qualify for federal resources. But if you have language issues, we have many Cambodian folks who, elderly in particular, who are citizens, but they do not speak the language well, and they did not know how to access a lot of resources that even they qualify for. So the groups that were working with immigrant groups in Long Beach have been trying to find ways to connect people, to connect to the community through WhatsApp, through Zoom. A lot of people a lot of the immigrants that they've connected to are accessing Zoom on their phones. So it's not that easy, but it can work, or through WhatsApp. So people are being connected, and through other social media sites. So people are being connected not only to break their isolation, but also let them know about the food banks, about some groups have done direct delivery of food, have given cash grants out, because there were foundations that offered cash grants to the community, the undocumented community, given that they don't qualify for any of the federal assistance. And these folks are part of the fabric of our community in Long Beach. We have 31,000, at least 31,000 people who are undocumented. And of course, they're part of our essential workforce. So, and many students in local universities and in our schools live with at least one undocumented parent. So if that parent lost their job or wasn't able to, or got COVID and couldn't work, things are really dire. So this kind of thing has gone on. Maybe just go back to the slide on the COVID shutdown. Yeah. So there are other things that people have been doing during the shutdown, particularly campaigning to shut down the detention center at Adelanto because of the inability of that center to control the COVID outbreaks. And they finally did get a judge in December to agree to order Adelanto to drastically reduce the number of people there. So according to my sources, Naomi Steinfeld in particular, there might be it might have gone down from about 4,000 to 400 at Adelanto. There still are people there, but many people have been released. And there were also trying to get people access to the vaccinations who qualify. So many people aren't in the usual notification networks, or don't have time to sit at home in a computer over and over again trying to schedule an appointment. So the community groups have been used to do the outreach as far as they can and help people who qualify in the categories to get access to the vaccinations. At the Dream Resource Success Center at Cal State Long Beach, they also have been doing fundraising to help direct assistance to students, and a lot of groups are trying to help the K through 12 kids access online learning when they're living in such crowded conditions and perhaps don't have anybody who might not have a parent who speaks English who can be there helping them. So there are some programs. It's very difficult though. Next one then. Oh, I'm sorry, combating fear. You can leave it here, but combating fear has been a big challenge during the COVID shutdown, because many people, even when resources were available, many people were afraid to access them. And that's the fault of the Trump administration in particular, who tried to make it so that if you access certain kinds of public resources, if you did get a chance for legalization someday, you would be denied. Or if you were in the process, if you had a green card and you were applying for citizenship, you would be considered a public charge. And beyond the actual policy that Trump tried to institute, there were always rumors that went way beyond that. So that even if you took food from a food bank or whatever, you know, people didn't know how to distinguish, or if you took your child to the clinic, you know, you might be deported. And so a lot of activity had to go into dispelling the fears and convincing people that they, you know, they could apply for certain kinds of rent assistance, they could accept the cash grants that were being offered, and could seek medical care and get their COVID vaccines. Next one. So I tried to put together some of the campaigns and projects that I know about that are going on. It's certainly not a complete list, and some of you in the audience probably know some other ones. And I'm focusing on local ones because also the ACLU is doing incredible work in terms of filing the lawsuits and those sorts of things. But what I wanted to focus on was local. So there's a tremendous campaign to try to support the people that are being released from Adelanto. And this is primarily being led by Clergy and Laity United for Equality. And locally, Naomi Steinfeld, who's a member of this council, and her crew have been doing amazing work as volunteers, literally transporting donations up to Los Angeles to the churches that have volunteered to house people who are coming out of the detention center who don't have somebody that they can move in with. You know, they may not have a relative in the United States, or those relatives may not be able to take them in these times. So they're setting them up with housing in some of the churches that have space. And the rest of us are being asked to support that effort. We had a whole list of things we could donate recently, but cash is always welcome, and they're giving them gift cards to folks who are setting up in these apartments and so forth. So you have the email there from Guillermo Torres at CLU if you want to find out what they need. They probably, and they do need and will need housing, as I'm sure the refugees who are coming over the border now will need as well. People like Naomi are still corresponding with those still in detention, who it's very easy to lose hope and become extremely desperate because of the conditions there, horrible conditions in that place. There should be no detention center, immigration detention centers. There's no need for them, but there certainly should be no for-profit detention centers, which is what Adelanto is. So if you want to join the campaign to shut down Adelanto, you're very welcome. I think the biggest thing I'm focusing on is trying to take advantage of this historical moment to get immigration reform. I was part of another historical moment in the 1980s. I saw what IRCA, how IRCA changed so many families' lives by getting legalization, how they went on to do all the things that they had dreamed of doing, become community leaders, run for office even, their children go to college. I've followed those families, and I think we have a moment, we have a window, but it's gonna be a tough, tough fight, because not because the American people don't support immigration reform, they do, but there's a lot of, because of the leftovers from the last 10, 15 years of the anti-immigrant movement moving from the margins of our politics to the mainstream, a lot of people are really badly informed, and elected officials are going to need to know that we're behind them. So what I'm asking everybody to do here that's listening today, who supports a more humane and just immigration policy, is to make sure that every one of your elected officials, even if you already know they're on board, make sure they have you on their list when they need you. Let them know what you support, and really help to build this kind of knowledge that Jose was talking about at the beginning, dispel the myths. And support the kind of executive action regarding the border that our friend from HIAS was talking about as well. If we do get, and that's the last slide, I just wanted to make one comment on our title, Welcoming the Stranger. We are welcoming some strangers, but the truth is the majority of people who will benefit from the 2021 Citizenship Act have been here 10 years or more. 67% of that 11 million that we've been talking about have been here 10 years or more. They're not strangers to us anymore. They're on their kids' soccer teams. Their kids are on our kids' soccer teams. Their kids are in our schools. They're working in our economy. They're folks that are rooted in communities. And finally, if we do get the Immigration Reform Act, or major parts of it, which I sure hope we do, there are going to be a lot of volunteer opportunities. So they aren't here right now, but you might want to clear your calendar. No, hopefully in a year or two, we'll have these opportunities. There will be a big need based on my past experience for all kinds of people to help with the paperwork, help people with the fees, help people understand what their rights are. There will be a need for more ESL classes, teachers and volunteers, and assistance with pro bono clinics. And if we all assert our power to educate and to advocate, then we'll have this wonderful array of volunteer opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Norma. That was very helpful, and I hope you'll allow us to share your PowerPoint, because I'm sure people will want those notes.
I will be happy to. I will also insert the missing slide that somehow I managed to drop out before I sent it. So
that's okay. So we do have some questions that have come in from the chat, and I have some too. John has asked, with everything that's going on, people coming from all these countries due to climate change, sea level rise, climate gentrification, climate migration, refugees, and environmental racism, where do those people fit in?
Can I go? It's great for all of us to just even chime in. But what's really interesting, we talked about just fragmented pieces of immigration, right? Unfortunately, even for asylum or any type of humanitarian form of relief, the pipeline and the tunnel to really get a benefit, it's so limited, it's so limiting that it's extremely difficult to even be granted asylum. As our friend Sue mentioned earlier, you need representation. And even with representation, it is so difficult. And it goes back to so within immigration law, there's the law, and then how it's applied, depends on which circuit you're in, depends on the attorney that's the trial attorney that they have. It depends on the immigration judge. And the conversations that we're having about immigration law in general, I think there's just so much in it, right? And for some people, it's a political power. If I stand with my political party, right, over a just and fair and equal and equitable immigration law, then I might be able to stay in office for a longer time. But if I vote for that policy or law or are in favor of immigrants, even though they make our economy and the country that we live in a better place for all of us to live in, then I might lose that power. And then where do I go? And so what's really interesting is that we're so focused on just creating divide that we're not focused on the actual issue. And so for folks who are migrating or fleeing because of political or of climate reasons, there's really actually no room. And so sometimes only rooms are creative if there's a natural disaster that is so intense where some kind of temporary protective status is issued, but then you end up creating a new category where those folks are in limbo, and we welcome them, but then to that extent. They're not eligible for any resources. There's no power towards residency or citizenship. And so it's this constant system of like, we want you, not really. And if you're here, then we'll create systems that really ban you from actually getting or being put in a pathway towards citizenship.
I know that there is a separate refugee system from the asylum system. Has there been any forward movement allowing refugees in and processing their claims more quickly, or has the pandemic kept that from happening? Sue?
Yeah, the U.S. Refugee Admissions program, I also worked in that program before. Biden has pledged to increase what's called the presidential determination, which is the number of refugees that can be admitted every year, up to 62,000 this year, up from which it's currently at 15,000, which is what Trump set, which is the lowest it's ever been ever. And for next year to set it at 125,000. Which is what Obama was going to, is what Obama had, was on track to well, he had set it at 100, but yeah, he was encouraging 125,000 as well. So the problem is Biden hasn't actually signed the presidential determination yet. So just this week, there were 700 refugees that were ready to travel, ready to go, and their flights literally got canceled at the last minute because the way the law works, the president actually has to sign this particular document before that can all happen. But importantly, Biden's plans for the Central America region, which is where there's a large number of asylum seekers coming to the border from, he is planning to increase refugee resettlement options from within those countries. So setting up operations in El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, so that people can apply for refugee status in the region and not having to make that dangerous trek all the way to the border and be able to enter the US as refugees. That is a fairly long process. I don't know if it's going to become any quicker because there's a lot of steps, a lot of security screening, medical screening, et cetera. But we're happy to see that is seen as an option for dealing with the Central American migrants as well.
If I can add oh, go ahead, Norma.
Oh, well, maybe I was going to take it in a different direction. Go ahead, Jose.
I was just going to add a little bit. Also, it's important. So, for example, the lingering impacts of the previous administration, right? Not that the previous administrations were perfect, but with the Trump administration specifically, I mean, it really just punched the heart and soul of America. And so the reason I'm saying this is because, for example, the presidential determination, right, the set number of refugees, that's not a targeted number, it's just a set number, was set at 15,000. So that number is set for this year, kind of like the new presidential determination will be signed sometime in late September because it's a fiscal year. So the next 125,000 would be set for 2021, 2022. So even if we got all 15,000 refugees for this year, that's only 15,000 out of like, millions. There's millions of refugees. And in addition to that, as the number went from 110,000 with the Obama administration to 15,000 with the Trump administration, just think about all of the infrastructure that was completely dismantled. That's case management, that's folks abroad that are doing health assessments, that's individuals that are doing the screenings for Department of Homeland Security. That's, I mean, all the trainings, all the visas, there's COVID. Like, it is a huge system that needs to be rebuilt. And there's always been a conversation about, well, what about if we accept more refugees? Isn't that a threat to our government? Well, no, there's like 7 different entities that are part of the screening. As you mentioned before, people are being welcomed already with COVID shots. Like the way when we handle security stuff, we're doing it really well. The interesting thing is the rest of the country doesn't know these details. And so you start creating an image of like, well, no, these are a threat to our security. They are criminals. They're doing this. And so then you create a them versus us type of approach or system that really just destroys everything that we have, or the very little opportunities that exist for immigrants to become residents or citizens.
Norma, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say the pressure right now is on the restoring asylum and refugee policies because they were so blatantly violated. You know, every international convention that we've signed has been violated, and it's such a undermining of our democracy. But the orderly migration of people for economic reasons, for non-asylum, non-refugee reasons, if that's restored, if that's put back on, if it's put in a thoughtful way. This economy needs workers. You know, you don't have to be really go to college or have a PhD to know that advanced industrial economies need workers. You know, there's a parallelism between well, I don't want to go into the whole thing, but there's a great book on the boomers and the immigrants, how they're, you know, there's a symmetry there and a complementarity, but it's true in Europe as well, it's true in Japan, it's true everywhere. So if you had this orderly process where people knew that they could either reunite with their family members or migrate for supposed economic reasons or for opportunities in an orderly fashion, people wait and go through that process, that legal process, when they know that it works. And so some of these folks who might be climate refugees might be able to perhaps go through that kind of an immigration process if it were developed and resist. And the old immigration reform plan that they had in 2006, a lot of things I didn't like about it, but one really good thing I thought about it was they were going to establish a commission that would weigh the demand for coming to the United States with the needs, the demand and the supply. And they would have experts, there are tons of people who know how to do this, decide how many people does the United States need, who wants to come, and then they match that and they set the quotas each year. You know, it would be really easy to have an orderly immigration process. And you know what the other thing is? I think that when you pose the question in a certain way to most Americans, the majority support immigration. You know, they support immigrants and they support immigration. It's only when you distort the question or you fall into these fears or these myths that they get nervous. But over the years, consistently, the surveys have shown, now it's gone down a little bit, but can show that the majority of people, especially those who've had immigrants in their areas for long periods of time, they don't have a problem with it. It's manipulated by, you know, interests, certain kinds of interests that are very well funded.
Certainly. Can one of you explain or describe the current situation with unaccompanied minors?
There's a lot to talk about with unaccompanied minors, so maybe I'll just specifically talk about at the border, when they approach the border. There is supposed to be a protection under the Trafficking Victims and Protection Act, whereby unaccompanied minors receive special protections when they cross the border. However, because of Title 42, that has not been happening, and unaccompanied minors have in fact been returned to Mexico or put on planes and sent back to their own country. So it's something that a lot of organizations have their eyes closely on, but it's not a good situation for unaccompanied minors at the border right now. I don't know if perhaps one of the other speakers would like to talk about those that are already in the interior or any other aspect.
You know, I can give you a short story even just before this administration came into place. So unaccompanied minors are a really interesting group of people because the moment that they approach any part of the border, right, we have to note that any part of the border, they're given that access to enter, go through that process, be screened, and then ultimately be reunified with a relative, apply for asylum or special immigrant juvenile status. I mean, you know, there's definitely different pathways that they can go through. But I remember one specific story about a child that was coming from Central America. As Sue mentioned before, there was this metering system, right? Just think about you right now, pause for a second. I know they were really busy, but think about going to the deli, right? And especially even right now with COVID, right? You wait in line, you wait 6 feet apart, and that could be like 5 minutes, that can be 20 minutes, that can be 40 minutes, that can be 30 minutes. And so you're there for a long period of time, depending on what number you hold. Well, in this case, the US government and the Mexican government were working really closely in limiting the amount of unaccompanied minors at the border. And so we happened to be there that morning, and the young boy approached me and other staff members from World Relief and told me, so, hey, you know, I want to go and seek asylum and get a number, this metering number, this deli number, but the Mexican government saying, like, if I show up one more time, they're going to send me back to Guatemala. And that was just so unfair. So what we actually had to do was contact al otro lado staff member, right? Remember, this is his right to seek asylum, but we had to contact al otro lado staff member, an attorney, right? Then house him at a children's center for about 2 weeks, and then bring him so that we can assess when is the right time where an officer might allow him to enter, right? And so all of that is so crazy, because then Mexico passed a law that said that if you are assisting or working with a minor, you can be charged with human trafficking, right? Or also with anything related to aiding and abetting. So which attorney is going to do that when also the system in Mexico, the criminal system, or even that process, there's no due process there, right? And if due process is being also impacted in the United States, where is the justice system? And so this is just a short story of how horrible and how dehumanizing and how tactful the different systems have been working with each other so that folks cannot get that opportunity to seek refugee or asylum, right? And so it's part of agreements, international agreements, as Norma said before, where we have that. Now we recognize that not everyone qualifies, right? But we have skilled people, we have leaders who can make these systems work, but we simply choose not to. And instead of focusing on the problems that exist within the system, we just blame immigrants. And so that's something that is extremely important to really kind of wrestle with, because a lot of folks start believing that it is the people that are the problem and not the system. And so we really need to address that. But that's just one example of the dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of children who become exploitable, right? Because of just the vulnerability that they're in, given that they are minors, it's a new land, new territory, and there's a lot of things happening in any part. It could be in the United States or in Mexico, but unfortunately, in this case, they're residing in Mexico, and that's where they could be exploited.
Someone wants to know if VARAL, V-A-R-A-L, is still available. Said you would know what it is. Doesn't ring any bells to anybody. Okay, Sherry, you're going to have to give us more information on that one. I think in the unaccompanied minor, there was also something in the news recently about shelters and facilities being reopened. Are we confident that those are going to be handled well, I guess?
HIAS's stance on that is we need to be vigilant. If those shelters truly only serve the purpose that the administration says they're going to serve, and that is to be able to process the unaccompanied children so that they can join their sponsors, because there's some vetting that has to happen of the sponsors. You don't want to release a kid just to anybody, right? So to hold them just for the shortest amount of time possible before they can be released to sponsors, if that's truly what they are, then great. But if they turn into the type of shelters run by the Office of Refugee Resettlement that we saw under the Trump administration, or even under the Obama administration, then that's a problem. So we need to remain vigilant and make sure that they really are just used in the way that the administration is saying they're going to be used in. Jose, I saw you nodding. Did you want to add?
Okay.
I just agree with you.
Okay. And can you bring us up to date on what's happening with the children who were separated from their parents during the family separation plan?
Well, I know there's different organizations that have been worked closely with different partners. Again, you know, immigrants don't have a right to an attorney that's provided by the U.S. government. Immigrants have to find their own attorney, their own counsel, their own guide, and really navigate the complicated and difficult immigration system that we have. And so there's been a lot of work that's being done by just different organizations in order to make sure that they find the parent who's been deported and has been away from that child for the past 2-3 years, right? And so there's been progress. We're not there yet, but there is progress. And I think, again, it goes back to that child still needs representation in the courtroom. And so, you know, there's policies put in place where a person needs to apply for asylum within 1 year of arrival. There's policies put in place that you have to have evidence and demonstrate in the courtroom that you have the right to asylum and that the burden falls on you, right? And so when a child doesn't have these resources or opportunities or the care from the parent, you know, it just becomes so much more complicated. And so, and then on top of that, trying to find out where the parents are at, it is a challenge. It is extremely challenging. If it requires a whole team of attorneys just to bring a parent to the United States, and maybe they'll let them in, you know, you still have to navigate that. It's quite difficult. And I think for the very first time in the last 4 years, I think legal counsel or folks who are doing activist work in any part of the immigration system are barely getting to breathe. Like for the very first time, we're able to like gasp for air for a little bit and then breathe in. Before it was just, we're on a rush. We're trying to put out one flame and putting out another fire and another. And I mean, every Friday it almost seemed like if it's not family separation, it's deportation. If it's not deportation, they close the system. I mean, when I started working, immigration law, just our immigration law, asylum law as it stood, it was like anyone has the right to seek refuge or protection of the US in any port of entry, doesn't matter where you're at, that's it. By the time the Trump administration left, it was like A through Z. It was about to start the Greek alphabet too. You know, and it's just restriction after restriction to the point that it was almost like, where is the humanitarian part of this country? You know, and so it's been quite unfortunate, but the reality is that there are entities working extremely hard to make sure that justice prevails and that children are reunited with their loved ones.
And the president did create a special task force for the reunification of separated families. And I know the person has just been named to head that task force, Michelle Bernay, and she's, I think, going to do a great job. But as Jose was saying, not only do those kids need attorneys, but the parents do. Remember, the parents were seeking asylum in the United States. So if they want to join their child in the United States, they're going to have to win asylum in order to do so. And will they be allowed to be in the United States while that happens? Many of them are back in home country. So it's very, like Jose said, just finding the parents, that's the really hard part. But some progress is starting to be made for the remaining. I'm not sure what the latest count is for how many kids are remaining, but it's certainly still over 300, I believe.
Yeah, the Trump administration did a lot of their immigration work through regulations. I would assume that the Biden administration has the people in place to unwind and re-regulate, I guess would be the way to put it. Working on that end, we hear about the bill that would go through Congress that would help, certainly, but also on the regulatory front, is there action there?
Well, I can speak to that, but also I don't want to speak over my other colleagues. I've been speaking a lot. It's not as easy as just unwinding. There's a process that regulations go through, right. And there has to be a comment period, and there has to be a publication, and you can't just undo a regulation. You have to publish a new regulation and go through all those steps again. So it's a multi-month process. And yes, I believe that there are people working on doing that for the really harmful regulations. There's also a lot of lawsuits that are pending against the regulations. And I know that my hope, along with many of my colleagues, is that the courts will be able to invalidate those regulations quicker than the process of like actually implementing new regulations. But I'll see if my colleagues want to say anything else.
Norma, do you want to say anything?
No, just, I don't know if you're talking also about executive actions, which isn't that,
I don't
I'm
know
not
if there's
sure.
anything in the pipeline on executive actions.
Yeah, I'm not sure. The executive actions can be implemented immediately, right? Yeah, so the regulations are a separate process, and it is very cumbersome, although in some cases it favors us. Like we had a lot of time to campaign against the public charge regulation, and that comment period, those kinds of things help. But in undoing unjust regulations, it's a drag. But the executive actions, again, can be taken, but again, they can be challenged,
And I think even similar, even whether it's a regulation, a bill, an executive order, they're all very interconnected, right? If designed to create harm, they will create harm. If designed to create a system, to strengthen the system, to really create a pathway, then they will do that. Right? If the wording and the language that is used is language that encompasses the realities of the situation and the intention, right, and the impact it wants to make, it will do good. If it's not, it's not. And what we saw with the previous administration, it was a pendulum effect, right? It went one way, it swayed one way, and now it's swaying this way with the hope that justice prevails. But I think what ends up happening is that because immigration and the immigration system and immigrants have been politicized, like I mentioned before, right? It's almost kind of like them, this versus us. Like you take away this, well, I'll take away that. You take this, I take that. You say this, I say that. And it's just like, where did it go? Where did our ethics go, right? What are we really working towards? And I think this is in a very important year because it is important to bring every voice to the table, whether you're a Trump supporter, whether you're an Obama administration supporter, whether you're leaning left, whether you lean moderate, like all of our voices are important. All of our experiences are important. And I think the hard thing is that I think a lot of Americans don't know how to identify with each other, right? Because my experiences in California might be very different in Missouri, right? But the reality at the end of the day, I think we all want to be welcome, we all want opportunity, and we all want to feel safe, whether you're an immigrant or you're not. And I think that's what we're missing. We're missing conversation. We're missing in sharing stories of what reality is, as opposed to like, let me tell you what you should believe. And so we really need to get back to the very basics, which is conversation.
Thank you.
I would really like to support that. Can I do that? Because yes. Immigration has never been a left-right issue until recently. And it really isn't totally now if you break through the rhetoric and you break the manipulation. I really believe there's a lot of, dishonest manipulation on the part of some elected officials and the money behind them. But I think this is an issue that goes across race, it goes across class, and it goes across religious preference. And so this is where we come in. It is to be part of these coalitions that really are building in this diversity. There's a lot of great work in the evangelical churches around immigration reform and asylum and refugees. Why? Because they have on the ground experience in the countries that people are coming from. They're missionaries, they're members, so there's an understanding there. And the Mormons also, so people who aren't usually aligned politically are coming together around this need to restore these values. And it can be made a humanitarian issue. And we need to talk about the stories, like Jose says. Once you get back to the stories, that's what we did in the 1980s. We took people who were supposed to be communists, that's what Reagan said. We took families to temples and to churches, and we just had them tell their story. And the immigration system then, the commissioner was very angry. He would go to those same temples and churches. He said, if you vote for sanctuary, if you house these people, these communists in your church, you're going to lose that. People are going to lose their security clearances in the defense industry in your church. And the church would debate, should we, shouldn't we, should we take the risk? It's illegal. and they would vote to house the family, you know, and that's how we did it, one by one. And I was involved in that, and it was just, and we took Iowa farmers down to Nicaragua to talk to Nicaraguan farmers, and once they talked to farmers, they understood the immigration problem. And it just, you know, you really have to go, like, think outside the box, right? Think of a different way of doing, and if you want to call it depoliticizing, if you want to call it just good organizing, whatever you want to call it, it's possible. And so that's why, you know, whoever's in the audience who has a group or a club or a social network that they can influence, please influence them, really, and let the politicians know that you're watching them and that you're supporting them if they take a good position. If they take a risk, support them. Let them know you're in one of those indivisible clubs. Those clubs are incredibly effective. You know, they've pulled off some really big things, but it's not a left-right issue. And it's not I have faith in the interfaith community. It's not as strong as it was in the 80s. The churches aren't as strong in American society as they were, but there's where people can at least talk somewhat across these class and other difference lines. So that's where I'm putting a lot of my effort right now.
Thank you. Thank you. And Sue, do you have anything you'd like to say to wrap up? Okay, well, thank you so much to Sue and Jose and Norma. You've given us a lot to digest and a lot of ways to help too, I think. As a reminder.
Actually, you did remind, I'm so sorry. I do want to put in a pitch for highest.org. Please go to highest.org. We have lots of different ways that you can get involved to support refugees and immigrants, advocacy things, grassroots type of work, and also volunteering work for attorneys and non-attorneys. So please check out highest.org. And I'm very sorry to interrupt, Deb.
No, that's okay, because that was a perfect lead in to my next statement, which is for NCJW members. I'd like to take a moment to remind you that if you've not already done so, please sign the welcome card. You'll see a slide on it in a minute. This is a note to members of Congress asking them to prioritize the rights, dignity, and safety of refugees and asylum seekers. The link to this was also in the Friday's weekly advocacy wrap up, and it should be in the chat shortly. And if you'd like to please email us if you'd like to be part of a delegation to attend a virtual visit with our congressman. So thank you for that lead in. That's a highest initiative. From Jose, happy International Women's Day on Monday. Yes. And thank you so much for being here, Jose, Sue, and Norma. We're going to wrap this up. Thank you to our audience. I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia to talk about our upcoming events.
Thank you. I started to take the spotlights off our speakers, but really I wanted to leave them there for a moment so that I could also thank you personally. It was really a very educational and stimulating panel. It's a challenging topic, and I want to go back to what Jose said before about having conversations. This is a conversation, and we need to have more of them. And maybe, we can lift up some other voices in, future panel discussions. One of the advantages of being able to do things virtually is that we can bring people in from all over. So we'll think about that. And now I wanted to, so I guess a hand for our speakers. Thank you. And now I will go ahead and share my screen and talk for a minute about upcoming events. Okay, so busy. Next week, we have an event on Saturday, March 13th. It's an evening event, And it's an event related to celebrating our 75th anniversary. We're going to have a virtual party with a magician named Johnny Wu. And please, I encourage you to invite family and friends. It should be a lot of fun. You can, by the way, register for any of these events and find more information at ncjwlongbeach.org. Then in a couple of weeks, we're going to have another speaker panel on homelessness. So that's March 21st at 4 p.m. And it's titled Resources and Directions in Greater Long Beach and Orange County. This is a panel that we're conducting in partnership with the League of Women Voters. And we're going to have speakers from the United Way, both from Long Beach and Orange County, and also providers of affordable housing and community services. Then on May 4th, I ask you to save the date for a speaker panel on domestic violence. We're still in the process of working out some of the details, but we do expect to have a therapist from Jewish Family and Children's Services to discuss really what is and isn't domestic violence. We're also going to have Judge Jacqueline Lewis, who runs the domestic violence court in West Covina. For the 17 years before that, her primary assignment was in the juvenile court, hearing cases centering around child abuse and neglect. We also hope to have a survivor to join us in that speaker panel. And it should be, again, a very interesting evening of discussion. And last but not least, on May 26th, all of the NCJW sections in California will be having a virtual lobby day. Normally, once a year in May, members from the different sections actually take an actual trip up to Sacramento to meet with state lawmakers about legislative and budget proposals. Now, research on the bills that we may support is still ongoing, but you'll hear more about that later on. So I encourage you all to join us again for these stimulating and fun, as in the case of our party with the magician next week, events. And until we see you again, stay safe, and thanks to everybody for attending.